Poppaea died pregnant, and the empire inhaled the rumor like smoke. Nero morund. Then he raised her to the gods. So what really happened? Was she killed, or was she rewritten? Before we descend into this story, subscribe, like, and leave your theory in the comments. Did Poppaea control Nero? But did history frame her? Now, follow me into the palace. Rome loved simple stories. It loved heroes who rose cleanly, and villains who could carry the weight of collapse. Poppaea Sabina became one of those villains. In later histories, she appears as a beautiful corrupter, a manipulator who bent an emperor to her will and paid for it with her life. Her name is often spoken in the same breath as Nero's cruelty, as though one explains the other. But Poppaea did not write her own story. She left no letters, no memoirs, no surviving voice. Everything we know about her comes from men of the Roman elite, writing years after her death, under emperors who despised Nero and feared women who stood too close to power. And to understand why Poppaea was judged this way, we first have to understand where she came from. Poppaea Sabina was born around the year 30 CE into wealth, rank, and proximity to power. Her father, Titus Aulus, was a Roman equestrian. During the reign of Emperor Tiberius, Rome experienced one of its most ruthless political purges tied to the fall of Sejanus. Titus Aulus was caught in that fallout. He died when Poppaea was still young. In Rome, a father's fall did not remain private. It followed a family like a shadow. Poppaea's mother, Poppaea Sabina the Elder, understood this well. She was wealthy, influential, and remarried into protection, preserving her place among Rome's elite. Poppaea later took her mother's name. In Rome, names are not sentimental. They were survival. This was the world Poppaea learned to navigate. But she was not alone in learning it. Poppaea's story can't be told by looking at Poppaea alone, because in Rome, a woman's fate was shaped by the men who held power, and the man who would decide hers was already being formed. To understand what Poppaea became, we have to understand Nero. Nero was born in 37 CE as Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. His father died early. From that point forward, his life was shaped almost entirely by his mother, Agrippina the Younger. Agrippina was dynastic. She was the great-granddaughter of Augustus and believed power was something to seize and secure. She married Emperor Claudius. She engineered Nero's adoption. She sidelined Claudius's biological son, Britannicus. When Claudius died in 54 CE, Nero became emperor at 16. Ancient writers accuse Agrippina of poisoning Claudius. This cannot be proven. What can be proven is the outcome. Nero ruled young, surrounded by advisors, with his mother watching closely. Coins even bore her image beside his. Rome did not like that. And as Nero grew older, the question wasn't how he came to power anymore. It was how he could escape it. Before Poppaea ever entered Nero's life, she was already close to the machinery of empire. Her first marriage was to Rufus Crispinus, Praetorian prefect under Emperor Claudius. They had a son. When Agrippina rose, Crispinus lost his position. Soon after, the marriage ended. Later, under Nero, Crispinus was banished and killed. Poppaea's son disappears from the record. Ancient tradition claims Nero ordered the boy's death, but this cannot be proven. Poppaea's second marriage was to Otho, one of Nero's closest companions and a future emperor himself. There is no evidence Poppaea had children with Otho. When Nero became interested in her, Otho was sent away to govern Lusitania. To the public, it was a promotion. In reality, removal. By the time Poppaea stood near Nero, she was not entering power for the first time. She was returning to it. Ancient sources do not give us a dramatic meeting. No scene, no dialogue. What they give us is a shift. Because at some point, Nero became deeply attached to Poppaea, and that attachment mattered. Poppaea was not simply another woman in the palace. She arrived with experience and with position. She had already been married into the imperial system, already learned the language of power, already survived the dangers of Rome's inner circle. By the time Nero noticed her, she didn't need to enter power. She was stepping back into it. But Nero's world was already occupied by two women who represented two different kinds of authority. His mother, Agrippina, represented control. She had built his throne and expected obedience. His wife, Octavia, represented legitimacy, a political marriage, Claudius's daughter, a symbol of continuity. Poppaea changed everything because she stood between both. Not publicly, not with speeches, but with presence. The sources accuse her of pushing Nero away from Agrippina and toward a life where he answered only to himself. That claim cannot be proven, but the timeline reveals the consequences. In 59 CE, Nero ordered his mother's murder. There is no proof Poppaea commanded it. There is proof Nero chose it. And once Agrippina was gone, one obstacle fell, but another remained. Octavia, popular, legitimate, untouchable, at least in the eyes of the people. And that is where Poppaea's story turns from influence into empire. Octavia was still there, legitimate, beloved, and still Nero's legal wife. In 62 CE, Nero divorced her. Rome erupted. Ancient sources describe crowds rallying for Octavia and tearing down Poppaea's statues as if the city itself had chosen sides. Then came the accusation. Adultery. Modern historians widely view it as fabricated. Octavia was exiled and soon after executed. One fact is certain. Nero signed the orders. But the ancient writers blamed Poppaea. They claimed she pushed for the divorce and refused to live as empress while Octavia still breathed. Those claims cannot be proven. What the timeline proves is this. Octavia fell, and Poppaea rose. And once Octavia was gone, nothing stood between Poppaea and the imperial title. Before we go further, we have to pause. Because the Poppaea you hear about in ancient history is often a character, not a person. Writers like Tacitus and Suetonius paint her as ambitious and ruthless. But modern historian Michael Grant warns that this portrait may be shaped by literary imitation, not eyewitness truth. He points out that Tacitus's language describing Poppaea echoes the way earlier Roman authors described Sempronia, a woman linked to the Catalan conspiracy, suggesting Poppaea may have been written using an old Roman stereotype. And when you look closely, even the hostile historians give few specific details of what Poppaea actually did. What we can pull from the record is smaller, sharper, and more human. Poppaea was likely slightly older than Nero. She was famous for amber-colored hair, which Nero even praised in verse. Later tradition credits her with popularizing a face cream. She reportedly consulted astrologers, and she had enough influence to offer patronage, including to Jewish communities. This is where the story becomes complicated. The Jewish historian Josephus describes Poppaea as sympathetic to Judaism, even calling her a worshiper of the God of Israel. He records her intervening with Nero on behalf of Jewish priests, persuading the emperor not to force them to tear down a wall connected to the temple dispute involving Herod Agrippa II. But history doesn't let her remain a simple protector either, because later, Poppaea is also linked to securing the appointment of Gessius Florus as procurator of Judea, a man remembered for actions that harmed the Jews. So the truth is this. Poppaea isn't easy to place into one role. She may have been ruthless. She may have been compassionate. She may have been both. And if that sounds contradictory, that's because Rome itself was. Now, with that reality in mind, let's return to the events that made Poppaea infamous. In January 63 CE, Poppaea gave birth to a daughter, Claudia, Augusta. The child was celebrated and elevated as the future of the dynasty. When Claudia Augusta died only months later, she was deified. Even in loss, the regime tried to manufacture destiny. The streets still remembered Octavia, and Rome was still watching Poppaea. In 65 CE, Poppaea was pregnant again. Rome expected another heir. Then Poppaea died. The medical cause is unknown. Ancient writers offer competing versions. A fatal kick in a moment of rage, rumors of poison, even accounts that admit uncertainty about intent. None of this can be proven beyond hostile narrative tradition. Pregnancy complications were common and deadly in the ancient world. What we can say with certainty is Nero's response. He mourned publicly, staged elaborate ceremonies, and had Poppaea officially deified alongside her daughter. From this point on, Poppaea was no longer a living person in history. She became a symbol. Poppaea's story was written by men hostile to Nero and suspicious of women near power. Roman historiography repeatedly portrays influential women as corrupting forces. Cleopatra, Messalina, Agrippina, Poppaea fit the pattern. She benefited from Nero's actions, but Nero made the decisions. Influence is not authorship. Benefit is not guilt. Poppaea left no voice to counter accusation. She became a character rather than a person. Poppaea Sabina was not innocent, but she was not the architect of Rome's collapse. She was a woman navigating one of the most violent political systems in history, where survival depended on proximity to power and silence could be fatal. History judged her harshly, but history was written by those who survived the court she did not. And that may be the most Roman truth of all. If you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe, and comment below. Was Poppaea a villain or a woman trapped inside Rome's machinery?